A saleswoman at one of the most exclusive car showrooms in Scottsdale looks a dusty man in a faded ball cap up and down and tells him, very politely, that he'd probably be more comfortable somewhere else. Not because he was rude, not because he touched anything he shouldn't have, because he'd walked in off the street in a grease-stained t-shirt and old boots, and she'd done the math in about 2 seconds, the way she'd been trained to, the way she had to, and decided he was a tire kicker who would cost her a Saturday she could not afford to lose. The man did not argue. He looked at the car he'd come to see for one more moment, the way you look at something you'd been driving toward for a while. Then he turned to the woman, and he said, "Thank you for your time." Really, and he meant it, which somehow made it stranger. And he walked back out into the desert sun. In the parking lot, he made one phone call. It lasted less than 2 minutes. By Monday morning, the dusty man in the ball cap owned the showroom, the building, the inventory, every job inside it. Everyone who worked there spent that weekend certain they knew exactly what was coming next. Every single one of them was wrong. There is a showroom on a wide, sun-baked boulevard in Scottsdale, Arizona called Vireo Motor Cars. It sells the kind of cars that do not have prices on the windshield, because if you need to see the price, you are, by the showroom's own quiet logic, in the wrong building. Grand Tours hand-built in small European towns. Hypercars that come one to a country. The flagship on the floor that October was a Verano Gran Turismo, deep oxblood over camel leather, $312,000, and it sat on a slowly rotating dais under lights engineered to make the paint look wet. The floor was white marble. The espresso was free and excellent and served in real cups. The salespeople wore suits that cost more than most people's cars, and they were, every one of them, on straight commission, which is a detail that matters more than anything else in this story, because it is the whole engine of what went wrong. On a bright Saturday in October, a man walked in off the boulevard covered in a fine film of garage dust. He wore a faded ball cap, a gray t-shirt with a dark smear of grease across one side, jeans gone soft at the knee, and work boots that had clearly done work. His hands, if anyone had looked, had the permanent grime in the knuckles that mechanics never fully scrub out. He'd been in his garage since 6 that morning, elbow deep in the engine of a 1967 coupe he'd been restoring for 2 years, and he'd read something the night before about the new Verano's engine, and on a whim, still in his work clothes, he'd driven over just to stand next to one and listen to a salesperson tell him about it. His name was Marcus Rourke. If you had watched movies in the last 20 years, you knew the name. The quiet one. The reluctant hero. The man who did the hard right thing at the worst possible cost to himself, and who in real life was known for almost nothing except being decent. And for one other thing, if you were the kind of person who followed such things, that he was a serious, hands-dirty, knuckle-scraped car and motorcycle guy who did his own work and had more than once been photographed at a stoplight on a bike he'd built himself. He knew engines. He knew this engine. He probably knew more about the car on that rotating dice than anyone drawing a commission on the floor that day. Nobody looked at him twice, except to decide he didn't belong. He walked up to the Oxblood Verano and stood there, reading it the way a real gearhead reads a car, and he waited to be helped. And across the marble floor, a saleswoman clocked him and did the arithmetic her whole life now ran on, and started walking over to make him leave. The saleswoman's name was Tara Whitlock, and to understand what she did that morning, you have to understand that she was not a snob. She was drowning. And a drowning person will grab whatever keeps them above water, even if what they grab is the last of their own kindness. Tara was 43. She had sold cars for 11 years, the last 3 at Vireo, and she was good at it. And she hated a little more of what it had made her every single month. Straight commission at a store like Vireo is a beautiful thing when you're closing and a knife at your throat when you're not, and Tara had not been closing. Her ex was 3 months behind on support. Her daughter, Ivy, was 9 and needed braces the insurance wouldn't cover. And the rent on their 2-bedroom had gone up again in the spring, and Tara was that October, 1 bad month from moving Ivy into her mother's place 2 states away and calling it a fresh start when they'd both know it was a retreat. And presiding over all of it was the general sales manager, a man named Grant Mercer, who ran the Vireo floor on a single principle: fear. Grant kept a whiteboard in the back with everyone's numbers on it, updated daily, the low names in red. He had a phrase he used in the morning meetings: you don't get paid to be nice, you get paid to qualify. And by qualify he meant sort, fast, ruthlessly, the buyers from the browsers, and spend not 1 minute of your commission clock on a person who wasn't going to sign. Grant humiliated the bottom of the board every Monday. Tara had been in the red 2 weeks running. She could not afford a third. So Tara Whitlock had learned to look at a person the second they walked in and decide, in the time it takes to blink, whether they were worth her Saturday. It was a skill she was ashamed of and could no longer switch off. It had cost her something she couldn't name and couldn't get back. She used to love this job because she loved cars and loved the look on a person's face when they drove off in the thing they dreamed about. Now she stood on a marble floor, doing triage on human beings for a man who mocked her in red marker, because her daughter needed braces and the rent was due. When she saw the dusty man in the grease-stained shirt standing next to a $300,000 car, every part of Tara that was still Tara wanted to walk over and talk to him about the engine. And every part of her that was behind on rent and 2 weeks in the red and 1 Monday from Grant's whiteboard did the math and said, "Tire kicker. He'll eat your whole morning and buy nothing, and Grant will crucify you for it. Get rid of him. Kindly, but get rid of him." She walked over. She smiled the smile that no longer reached anywhere. "Good morning," Tara said. "Is there something I can help you find? We do have a lovely selection of pre-owned models over at our sister location on Camelback that might be a better fit for what you're for a Saturday drive." Marcus looked at her. He understood the sentence completely. "I was hoping to hear the Verano run," he said mildly. "I read they revised the intake." "Cross-plane, crank now?" Tara blinked. That was not a tire kicker question, but the math had already been done, and the math is hard to undo once it's running, and Grant's whiteboard was louder in her head than the small surprised voice that said talk to him. "The Verano really is by appointment, and by qualification," she said gently. "I wouldn't want to waste your time this morning. You understand. You'd honestly be more comfortable somewhere else." There it was. You'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Marcus was quiet for a second. He looked back at the oxblood car one more time. And here is the part that everyone who later heard the story got stuck on. He was not angry, and he did not correct her, and he did not reach for his phone to prove anything. He looked at this tired woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and something crossed his face that was almost tenderness, because he had spent his whole life reading people, and he could see, plain as the grease on his own hands, that she did not believe a word she was saying, and that saying it was costing her something. "You're right," he said. "Thank you for your time." "Really," and he turned and walked back out into the sun. Behind him, at the sales desk, an older salesman named Walt watched the whole thing and set down his coffee, because Walt had seen that man somewhere, and Walt had a bad, sinking feeling that a very expensive mistake had just walked out the front door. Out in the parking lot, in the heat coming up off the asphalt, Marcus Rourke pulled out his phone and made one call. Not to complain, not to get anyone fired. He called his assistant, a woman named Priya, who had worked with him for a decade and could tell his moods from a single syllable, and what he said was not what you'd expect. "Hey, yeah, I'm fine." A pause. "Do me a favor. That dealer group that owns Vireo motor cars out here, Scottsdale, and I think a couple other stores. Can you find out who owns it and whether they'd sell?" Another pause, and Priya must have asked why. Because Marcus looked back through the glass at the marble floor, at the tired woman already triaging the next person through the door, at the whiteboard he couldn't see but could feel, and he said, "Because I don't think the people working in there are the problem. I think somebody's grinding good people into doing things they hate, and I think I'd like to fix it. A beat. Quietly, nobody loses their job over this. That's the one rule. Find out what it costs." Then he put his phone in his pocket, got back in his dusty truck, and drove home to his garage in his 1967 coupe. And he did not think about it again, because he had set it in motion, and Marcus was never the type to stand around waiting to watch a thing he'd started. It turned out the dealer group was in trouble. Over-leveraged, 3 underperforming stores, an aging owner who'd been quietly praying for an exit for a year. By Sunday night, Priya had a number. By Monday morning, the papers were moving. It took 11 days, all told, to close. And in those 11 days, Marcus asked for exactly one thing to be done. And it was not to fire anyone. It was for someone to pull, quietly, the last 90 days of the sales floor's internal records. The numbers, the coaching notes, the morning meeting recordings, all of it. Because before he set foot back in that building, Marcus Rourke wanted to understand exactly what was happening to the people inside it. He read all of it, and by the time he understood the whiteboard and the red marker and the phrase "you don't get paid to be nice," Marcus Rourke had stopped thinking of the tired woman who'd sent him away as the person who'd wronged him. He'd started thinking of her as someone he needed to get to before it was too late. The staff found out on a Tuesday. It came the way these things come: a memo, a rumor, then the front doors opening at 9, and a man walking in whom 2 of them recognized instantly, and the rest placed a beat later. He was not dusty this time. But he was not in a suit either. Just a plain shirt, jeans, the same work boots, and the same ball cap in his hand now instead of on his head. And he walked across the marble floor of the showroom he now owned, and every single person on that floor understood, all at once, that the tire kicker from Saturday had bought the building. You could watch it move through the room like cold water. And Tara Whitlock, standing by the espresso machine, felt the floor drop out of her life. She knew. She knew before anyone said a word. She thought about Ivy and the braces and her mother's spare room 2 states away, and she understood that she had, on the worst possible Saturday, politely thrown out the man who now signed her paychecks, and that whatever came next, it was over. She set down her cup because her hands weren't steady. She was already composing the goodbye to her daughter in her head. Grant Mercer, the general sales manager, did the opposite. Grant came striding across the floor with his hand out and his teeth showing, already spinning it, already the salesman. "Mr. Rourke, what an honor, what a... Listen, I have to apologize for Saturday. One of my people dropped the ball. Completely unacceptable. I've already spoken to her about it. Believe me, it will not." "Grant," Marcus said, not loud. It stopped the man cold. "Is that her?" He nodded, gently, toward the woman by the espresso machine who looked like she was waiting to be executed. Yes, that's Tara, and I want you to know I take full. Give us the floor for a minute, would you?" Marcus said. It was not a question. All of you, just for a minute. Tara, would you walk with me? The whole room watched the new owner of Vireo Motor Cars walk the saleswoman who'd thrown him out toward the glass-walled office in the corner, and every person on that floor was certain they were watching a woman get fired. Even Tara was certain of it. Especially Tara. They were all wrong. The office was glass on 3 sides, so the floor could see them but not hear them. Marcus closed the door and gestured for Tara to sit, and he sat down across from her, not behind the big desk, in the chair beside her, in his plain shirt and his mechanic's hands. And the first thing he said undid every wall she had left. I didn't buy this place to get back at you. Tara stared at him. Her eyes were already wet, and she hated it. You should, she said, before she could stop herself. I threw you out. Of a car showroom. You wanted to hear an engine run, and I told you you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. I don't even. You had grease on your hands, and you asked me about the crank, and she pressed her lips together. You should absolutely fire me. I'd fire me. Yeah, Marcus said. I read your file this week. All of it. 90 days. He let that sit for a second, and Tara braced. You know what I found? I found a woman who's been in the red 2 weeks running under a guy who puts people's names on a board in red marker and humiliates them Monday mornings. I found coaching notes that are really just threats. I found a morning meeting recording where your manager tells a floor full of grown professionals, and I'm quoting, "You don't get paid to be nice. You get paid to qualify." He leaned forward. So before you fire yourself, I want to ask you something. A woman doesn't triage human beings at the door because she's cruel. She does it because somebody's got a knife at her throat, and she's trying to survive. So what's the knife, Tara? What happens to you if you have a third bad Monday? And Tara Whitlock, who had told no one at that store the truth because at that store the truth was blood in the water, told the man in the ball cap everything. She told him about Ivy, and the braces, and the ex 3 months behind, and the rent that went up in the spring. She told him about her mother's spare room 2 states away, and how she'd started measuring her whole life in bad Mondays. And she told him the part underneath all of it, the part she was most ashamed of, that she used to love this job. That she'd gotten into it because she loved cars and loved the moment a person's face lit up driving off in the thing they dreamed about. And that somewhere in 3 years of Grant's whiteboard she'd turned into a woman who looked at a human being and calculated, in the time it takes to blink, whether they were worth her mourning. I threw you out, she said, and the whole time some little voice in the back of my head was saying, talk to him. He knows engines. Talk to him. And I couldn't hear it over the sound of my own rent. She wiped her face. That's not a person I ever wanted to be. Marcus did not interrupt. He let it all land. Then he told her something true about himself, that he'd spent years chasing enough money to feel safe, and that the money had come and the safe had not, because safe was never really about the money. And that fear will make a good person do things they'll spend years trying to forgive themselves for. And then he asked the question he'd bought a car dealership to be able to ask. Your daughter. Ivy. 9, you said. Marcus's voice went very gentle. One day she's going to be old enough to watch how her mom treats a stranger who walks in looking like he's got nothing. Might be a while off. But it's coming. He held her eyes. The woman you were at that door Saturday, is that the one you want Ivy learning from? Or is there another one in there? The one who used to love watching people's faces light up, that you've just been too scared and too broke to let out? Tara closed her eyes. That was the beat. The whole thing turned on it. I don't want her to be scared like me, Tara whispered. I don't want her to learn how to look at people the way I've learned to look at them. Then let's put you somewhere you don't have to, Marcus said, and he stood. I'm not asking you to grovel. I'm not even asking you to apologize, though I've got a feeling you're going to want to. I'm telling you, the knife's gone. The whiteboard's gone. The commission-only survival math that turns you into a person you don't recognize. Gone, as of this morning. You get a salary you can raise a kid on, and then commission on top, so that selling a car goes back to being a good day, instead of the difference between braces and no braces. He put his mechanic's hand on the door. And in exchange, I want the woman who loves watching faces light up back on my floor. Because I think she's a hell of a salesperson when nobody's holding a knife to her. Deal? Tara came out of that glass office, and the whole floor was braced to watch her walk out the front door with a box of her things. Instead, she walked, red-eyed and steady, over to the older salesman at the desk, Walt. And then she turned and faced the room, and she found the new owner by the espresso machine, and in front of everyone she said, Mr. Rourke, on Saturday I looked at you and decided in 2 seconds that you weren't worth my time, because of how you were dressed, and I sent you out the door of a place you'd every right to be. It was wrong. It would have been wrong if you'd turned out to be exactly the broke tire kicker I decided you were. That man deserved to hear the engine run too. I'm ashamed of it, and I'm sorry. Her voice held, barely. And thank you. Not for buying the place, for asking me what the knife was instead of just cutting me with it. Marcus gave her the smile, the real one, the warm one, slightly crooked. That's all I needed to hear, he said. And then Marcus turned to Grant Mercer, who had been standing very still through all of it, watching the ground shift under his feet. And here is where the story refused to become the thing everyone wanted it to become. Because Marcus did not humiliate Grant in front of the floor. He didn't put his name on a board in red. He walked over and said quietly, just for him, Grant, come talk to me. I read the last 90 days too. All of it. And I want to understand how a guy ends up believing that scaring good people is the same thing as leading them. Because either you didn't know another way, in which case I can teach you one, or you did and you liked it, in which case this isn't the place for you. Your call, but the whiteboard comes down today either way. Grant Mercer did not take the offer. Some people can't. He'd built his whole idea of himself on being the hardest man in the room, and a world where you didn't get to be that was a world he had no map for. And he cleared out his own office by the end of the week. Marcus made sure he left with severance and a reference for the honest parts of what he was. Nobody's name in red, not even his. That was the thing about Marcus. Even the comeuppance came with a door held open. Then Marcus found the older salesman, Walt, who'd recognized him on Saturday and set down his coffee with a sinking feeling, and who had spent 11 years being the last man on that floor who still treated a browser like a person and was, that very month, near the bottom of Grant's board for exactly that reason. Because Walt was too slow, too kind, too willing to spend an hour with a retired school teacher who just wanted to sit in a car she'd admired her whole life and would never buy. Walt, Marcus said, your numbers are terrible. Yes, sir, Walt said, they are. You want to know why I know your name? Marcus said. Because in the 90 days I read, you're the one guy on this floor who never once qualified anybody at the door. You lost sales you could have made because you wouldn't rush people. That school teacher last month, Grant put you in red for that hour. He nodded slowly. How'd you like to run this place the way you've clearly always thought it should be run? Here's the part the story usually skips. The slow part. The true part. It did not turn Vireo motor cars around overnight. Nothing turns overnight. The first quarter under new ownership, the numbers actually dipped. because a floor full of people who'd been trained to sort and pounce had to learn a slower, stranger trade. How to talk to a human being with no idea whether they'd buy. And be okay with that. Some of the sharks left. That world wasn't for them. There were weeks Walt, now running the store, sat in the office wondering if kindness was a business model or just a nice way to go broke. Then it started to move. And it moved the way real things move. By word of mouth, one person at a time. Because it turns out that when you let a salesman spend an unhurried hour with a nervous first-time buyer, that buyer tells 9 people. When you put a car in front of a wide-eyed teenager who could never in 100 years afford it and let him sit in it and rev it in the lot just to hear it, that teenager grows up and remembers where he was treated like he mattered. Vireo became, of all the improbable things, known as the place that would let anybody hear the engine run. The retired schoolteacher Walt hadn't rushed came back the next year and actually bought a modest pre-owned model and brought her whole book club. Tara Whitlock, off the knife's edge, became the best salesperson in the building within a year, because it turned out she'd always been that good and had only ever been strangled by her own fear. She used the first real commission check for Ivy's braces, and the second one she didn't spend at all, because for the first time in years she wasn't one bad Monday from disaster and didn't have to. She started a thing on the floor the staff just called Saturday mornings. The store opened early one Saturday a month to anyone who wanted to come look at cars they'd never buy. No qualifying, no pressure. Kids welcome, coffee's on us. Because she had decided that the moment a person's face lights up next to a car they love was worth giving away, whether they bought or not. It was, in fact, the exact opposite of everything Grant's whiteboard had stood for. That was the point. Ivy comes to Saturday mornings sometimes and hands out the free espressos in the little real cups. She's learning, without anyone having to teach her, how her mom looks at a stranger who walks in with nothing. Years later, a business magazine profiled the little Scottsdale dealership that had become a case study in doing it backwards and winning, and the writer asked Tara about the Saturday that changed it. She was quiet a while. "A man I threw out came back and bought the building," she said. "And everybody, including me, thought that meant he'd come to burn me down. Instead, he sat down next to me and asked what the knife at my throat was. Nobody had asked me that in 3 years. They just kept handing me sharper knives and telling me to qualify faster." She smiled. "He didn't save the dealership. He took the knife away and let the rest of us save it." Marcus Rourke was asked about it exactly once, at a junket for some film. He looked almost puzzled, like he had to reach back for it. Then he shrugged. She wasn't a snob. She was scared, and broke, and being ground down by a guy with a whiteboard, he said. "You don't fix that by firing the scared person. You fix it by taking away the whiteboard." And he moved on to the next question, because he was, as ever, already gone before the credit arrived. I have told a lot of stories on this channel, but I keep coming back to this one. And I've thought a long time about why. Because on the surface, it's the most satisfying setup we've got. The rich guy gets snubbed. The rich guy buys the whole store. Oh, here it comes. That's the part we click for. I clicked for it too. But the part I actually keep is that he read her file. 11 days he owned that place before he ever walked back in, and he spent them not building a case against the woman who'd wronged him, but trying to understand what was being done to her. He came in ready to take a knife away, not to use one. And I think that's the whole thing, because it would have been so easy, so satisfying, so deserved, to fire her in front of everyone and let the internet cheer. He did the harder, quieter, better thing instead. He asked what the knife was. So here's the question the story left me with, and I don't have a clean answer for it. When somebody's short with us, cold with us, dismissive at a door, our instinct is that they're a bad person, and we'd love to see them get theirs. And sometimes that's true. But an awful lot of the time, the person being cold to you has a knife at their own throat you can't see. A whiteboard, a rent check, a kid who needs braces, a fear that's slowly turning them into someone they never wanted to be. Would I think to ask about the knife in the hot moment when I'd just been made to feel like nothing? Honestly, I'm not sure. Most of us aren't sure. And maybe that's the thing worth carrying out of that showroom. That the person who was unkind to you today is very often just someone being crushed by a weight you'll never see, and the bravest thing you can do is get curious about the weight instead of adding to it. This story is fictional, inspired by the quiet kind of decency the best people are known for, the kind that asks what the knife is instead of reaching for one of its own. If it got to you, do me a favor down in the comments. Don't just say great story. Tell me about a time someone was short with you and you later found out what they were carrying, or a time you were the one carrying something nobody could see. I read every one. They're the best part of this. And if you know someone who's being ground down right now by a weight nobody sees, send them this. It might be the exact thing they need to hear today. If you're new here, subscribe. There's another story coming, and I'd be glad to have you for it. See you in the next one.